What's up, guys? Welcome to Roaring Podcast, where we interview experts in tech and product management, providing insights and tips on how to digitize and automate your business processes. My name is Jesper Kask, and I'm your host. What is bad data, and how do you avoid it? In this episode, I'm joined by Pontus Holmberg, Product and Innovation Manager at Roaring. We talk about the consequences of bad data and how to ensure data quality over time. Enjoy. Okay, so welcome, Pontus. It's great to have you on the show.
Nice to be here, first time, and hopefully we'll get an interesting discussion together.
Yeah, we're here to talk about data and bad data in particular. So Gartner recently released a study regarding bad data and the effects that it has on companies, including costs, missed opportunities, and loss of revenue and deteriorating reputations and so on. But what is bad data and how do you avoid it?
In my opinion, I think bad data in all essence is when you're consuming or using data that is inaccurate. And it doesn't matter really for what kind of purpose, because I think the old general saying where, shit in, shit out is really explaining what happens when you're using incorrect data. But I think that one important thing here is that bad data goes all layers over a company. If you have bad data in terms of your customer data, that will affect you. But also if you have bad data in regards to your competitor and how you treat your competition, and if you have bad data, internal bad data in your system. So it's bad data all over the place will really sort of affect your business in a negative way. And there is obviously, I think we're going to talk a little bit more about sort of external data and how you're sort of can avoid using bad data. So that's, I think that's going to be the topic, what we're going to discuss today. But bad data is really that simple, shit in, shit out.
So what are the biggest challenges today for companies when trying to manage data in different forms?
I think that there are several challenges, but I think that the biggest is, it doesn't matter if you're a small or a mid-sized company or a large company, but one of the challenges is definitely that you're combining different kind of sources for your data. So first, there can be the structured data that you're actually receiving from a provider, but then at the same time, you're using and consuming and creating your own data. So we can take an example with customer data. So let's assume that you're actually retrieving the data from a third-party vendor, but then you're actually interfering with the data because you're inserting it into your CRM system, and then you have individuals at your company, employees, that is responsible for working within the CRM system, and then obviously they can alter with the data. So you have fields that is open, so fields within the CRM system where you can actually type in things. You can attach data sets to a company information page. And ultimately, just assume that you are a small company with 25 people and you have 5 people that is working within the CRM system, and you have given them access to actually write things about the company or the customer activities. And you combine that information created by the employees, and then you sort of combine that with the information that you're taking from a provider. That means that you will often get into the sort of the sense that you are secure in one way, where you think that we are actually getting the data from a supplier, but on the other hand, you will automatically sort of make your data dirty and dirtier and dirtier over time. So again, the problem is in how you're handling multiple sources of data, and it is not enough. It's not good enough to just use one source and think that you have solved it, because you will always have human interaction with that data. So you need to find a method in controlling the changes and in controlling the sources you're actually using. And I think that one important thing here is that it's actually not a simple task to create a database where we actually can handle multiple sources, because each source in itself might be correct, but at some point, as a company or within a database, you are most likely you want to utilize those different data sets in different ways in a CRM system, in an ERP system, and they are not always communicating that well. So I think that's a challenge, where you are combining data and you have manual interference with the data, and you have several people that have access to do those things to the data.
And you might even have a third party as well, where the customer enters data or puts in data as well.
Yeah, that's another source. So it becomes complicated when you want to have the sort of fully digital way of handling data, but in the end, to create that sort of what's that word? If you want to create the one single master data repository, it becomes complicated, because you will add complexity to it, because as you said, you will allow different people and different stakeholders to interact with the data. So that's basically goes for any company or organization. It's a challenge.
So in terms of having all of these multiple sources, how difficult does it get when you also add on top of that a lot of manual processes or steps in between, like having a customer fill out a paper form, or like you said, having employees go into the CRM system and doing changes on their own by hand. What kind of complexity does that add to it?
It creates a great complexity. I think that one of the more sort of simpler ways of I would say solve it, or at least reduce that risk, is first you need to have in place sort of a data policy within your company, and a sort of a data governance in place to be able to define what kind of data are we allowed to change and who can change those data sets. And I would say, I think it's I make it really simple now, but I think that policy should definitely be, do not interfere with the data. I think that if you allow people, employees, to interact with customer data, for an example, hardcore customer data, such as addresses or whatever, revenue numbers or industry codes, etc., it will create big problems for both for the company, but at the same time to maintain that data set, because then you obviously need to cleanse it, and you need to obviously update it. But the biggest challenge is, besides the whole shit in, shit out problem, is that to define those governance and rules and internal regulations on how you should treat your data and who can interfere with the data. I think that any company that allows the employees or a sales representative to go and insert or make changes to the sort of hardcore company data profile, that's the first step. Do not allow that. Close that, make that sort of an closed environment, and trust your sources. Trust your sources to deliver the accurate data, because if you are using a provider to update your CRM system, for an example, the most likelihood for the provider to give accurate data, it's much higher than having your sales rep to go in and change and alter with it. So the first step would be stop allowing individuals or people at your firm to interfere or to make changes to the data, and have a policy around that. What can be changed? Of course, you can have comments or in regards to the sales process, where we are, etc. But to interfere with the actual sort of customer data, that is just asking for problems. So stop doing that, and trust your sources. Trust that they are actually delivering the correct data set, and that's why you're paying a third-party vendor. You're paying them for doing the hard work of collecting and updating data, and make sure they are making sure that that data that they are sending to your CRM system or to any system that you're using the data, that they are the ones that guarantee that the information is accurate. So stop. The first thing would be stop interfering with the hardcore data set in any database. Do not allow people
to remove the human error factor.
Yeah, exactly.
Internally as well. And you mentioned shit in, shit out, and what in terms of consequences, if we were talking about the shit out part, I suppose, what are some of the consequences? I mean, we've all had these sort of where personalization goes wrong. For example, when you get a snail mail campaign that just hits you the wrong way because you've moved, or you don't, it doesn't apply to you or whatever. And you've also had a lot of ads in different social media and so on. But what are some of the other consequences that companies could face when using bad data?
I think the easiest answer, and a very generic one, would be they're losing business opportunities. I can give you an example, or an example. Yeah, an example would be if you, for an example, are asking a customer to fill in individual data regarding addresses and potentially family members, and you collect data sets asking for them to manually insert that into any onboarding process. And unfortunately, there is a lot of companies still doing that. So they think that they have sort of a digital onboarding process. They have a digital onboarding process in terms of that you can actually do it online. But beneath the surface, they might just rely on the data that you are, as a consumer or a customer, entering into the system with this with any form that is presented in a nicely way on the web. So the first sort of big risk is that if you will then potentially get false data into your system, because for an example, obviously I know my address, but there is a lot of information, detailed information, that I do not have. I can give you an example. I was asked from one of the companies that are providing savings into the stock market, etc. And I have a small savings account for my daughter, and I got a physical letter telling me that you need to update the information on the account holder, which then my daughter is only 4, so would be updating my information. First, it came as a letter, and then I went into their webpage, which they directed me to, and then I was supposed to start do that work. So they already knew who I am, because this was just an update, old information. They just wanted to secure that I'm still living on the same address, etc. But I need to fill in that from scratch. And then we come to parts where I can actually not answer the question. For an example, they were asking, where do we gonna send eventually future payouts, to what account? And I do not have my account number in my head. I do not. So to be able to solve that, I actually need to go in, look into my papers, to go into my bank, and then So what happens is that I do not do that. I haven't completed it yet, and I know I will get another letter that's saying you need to do that. But that's just a small example of the frustration it creates. Yeah. And that wasn't a big deal. But I got pissed. I didn't fulfill it, and this is just an example. But assuming we are talking about business, they've already have me as a customer. But assume that process is similar to other companies where they actually want me to sign up or to complete any onboarding process, but they're just doing it halfway. They are doing it in a digital way, but behind the scenes they do not utilize the capacity of automated processes. So it was a long answer, but that's obviously one risk. That's business risk. But then you have the other. I think the other risk would be, as we spoke in the beginning of the pod, you're just getting you just loading your system with crappy data. It's based on manual interpretation. It's based on from a customer who doesn't necessarily have the full answers, but will still type in the information because they want to proceed to go to complete their onboarding process. And then you have the other side is where you have then employees adding information to that. So ultimately, it's just a big sort of business risk into it, and then you have the sort of technical aspect of it to be able to handle in an efficient way to handle those kind of systems. You need to have databases in place where you can handle those errors and faults, which obviously takes a lot of time from any tech department to do the cleansing, to internal cleansing, and to have control of the data. So I think it just gives a lot of headache for all departments. And even the classic would be invoicing. So obviously, if you do not have the correct address to a customer, or you don't know what the customer actually has bought, etc., it just affects your business and your business model, and etc., etc. So it just becomes a hassle for everyone from all angles.
And there's an old saying that your decisions are only as good as the data you base them on. And obviously, having bad data creates poor decision making, and possibly a risk of, for example, allowing the wrong type of customer to become a customer, for example.
Yeah, I agree, and so we are obviously talking now a little bit more sort of concentrated around sort of customer data. But I think another example would be any company, small, big, that are taking decision based on sort of poor data. It doesn't need to be customer data. Let's assume that they are doing a strategy work and want to understand their competition landscape, and they want to have a product launch, and they have discovered a lot of things and developed world-class service, but they have missed out. For an example, just making this up now, but they've missed out that there is a competitor in another country that is entering the market with the exactly the same offering. That's the same thing, that you taking your decision on poor data. It will affect you heavily. It doesn't need to be based or evolve around customer data. It goes into all aspects of running a company. Data is crucial to be successful in the modern digital landscape that we are operating in.
And another thing that was interesting in the Gartner study that I mentioned was that data scientists in the US spend around 80% of their time organizing and cleansing data, meaning you're sort of shifting the possibilities of using data to your advantage to becoming a huge cost and a problem. So that's also another part of it. That's a huge problem with bad data and the way you handle it.
I agree, and I think the number really, in this context, it shocked me, because if you have a company and you have data scientists, which is quite bright people that's trying to look at data from different angles, and obviously trying to analyze data from a business perspective to create more revenue or to create more insights for you as a company to perform better. If they are forced to spend 80% of their time to handle quotation mark now, but sort of grunt work that is related to data cleansing, and basically data cleansing in this case would then refer to just have correct data into your system. That's a waste of resources. Instead, those data scientists, and obviously it goes in the name, they are data scientists. They could potentially create much better value than spending their time to make sure that any company can correct invoice correctly, or to ensure that the company profile data that we have on our customers or potential customer is actually not dirty. It's supposed to be clean, but they are spending so much time and effort, which obviously is then money, to just create this data ecosystem to be just fine. There's nothing magic happening with the data, because they are just spending a lot of time to just ensure that the company's processes is working. But if they would then spend the same amount, 80% of their time, in actually create innovative way of looking at the data, create insights of the data, create sales insights, whatever that can be. So it's just basically, it shocks me because 80% is a lot of, it's many hours every month that you spend on just getting your data correct.
So let's say that you sort of manage these processes well, and you get a clean data input into your database, and you have a cohesive view of the customer, for example. How do you ensure customer data quality or data quality over time? Because that's another challenge.
It's a challenge. I think that you're explaining the classic someone working at a company that understands the importance of having clean, correct data will obviously then run to someone who sits on the decision that we need to buy a data cleanse, or we need a provider that can clean our company record or customer record. And then you do that. You contact any firm. They happily will cleanse your data, and they will obviously ask for your records. And they will potentially ask you to send your customer database in any technical format or FTP. And that's the first thing where I would, I would think at least one more time if that's the process that I would like to have with this kind of provider, because normally your customer data and your whole sort of customer intelligence on your customer is obviously, it's the core foundation of your company. I would be hesitant to just send it away. But that's what happens often, that someone understands the importance of having correct data. You find a provider or a vendor that would do the cleansing for you, and you ship away your core asset over FTP, an FTP server, and then obviously a couple of weeks or 1 week after or 2 weeks after, you will get the data back. Most likely, they've missed some matches in regards to be able to identify, to do the matching against your customer database. But that's another story. So, and then you think that you're done. So you got this master record now. You have an updated customer database. Everything is fine and dandy. But in the end, the problem is just being solved for 1 or 2 weeks, because obviously your customer and your customer data is constantly changing. Addresses are shifting, the CEO, the board members of a company, the revenue, everything is changing. And then you do that kind of process again, 5 months again, because this clever guy then obviously understands that, okay, the data is not fully up to date, so we need to do this again. And then you obviously will send and ship your sort of customer database to this provider again and again, and you need to constantly load it in again. And so there's no way where you can actually beat the crappy data by just doing the updates irregularly or with the regularity of 3 or 4 months. It will just make the data as good as it is for now. And that's also that's a problem, because I think that many companies would then sort of they would sort of rely on that process. They are done there, and then they are happy with, and they can see that the CRM system is actually updated with the correct address, etc. But from time A to time Z, they don't have any clue what's happening with it. So it still will be false data. It will be crappy data in between. So that's, so yeah. Now I forgot your question, but that's still a challenge. So you can actually use a vendor to support that. But I think that sort of a modern company and modern providers of this sort of monitoring or updating any company record have a different approach today. There is modern technologies today where you can actually, instead of sending away your full customer database, instead use clever API technologies or webhooks, which basically is very simple technology for subscribe on notifications. It basically means that if you have a customer record, let's assume you have 10,000 customers, and get yourself hooked up through an API or through a webhook. A developer would do that within a couple of hours or 1 or 2 days. Then they have done the integration. And the greatness with that is that you do not need to ship your customer record or customer database to any third-party provider. So instead, you have your own customer records, and then you are just subscribing on the events or the changes that comes. And normally, if the provider is a clever one, it will have a structure on how it distribute the notifications. So assume that a clever provider would push all the changes of all companies in Sweden or in Denmark or whatever country you are operating in. But obviously, you do not want to have 5 million records being updated into your system. So instead, you're using the webhook in a clever way where you actually say, you do, on your end, the customer end, you do the match. So you just matches, okay, we've got 50 different updates today, and 5 of them are matching our customer record. Okay, I want to fetch the actual change or the actual data set on those 5 companies. And that's the beauty of API technology or the webhook technology, that you can just pinpoint and you do the matching yourself. You don't need to send away any customer records. You will be compliant. You don't need to think about GDPR. That's just a hassle in itself when trying to exchange customer records. So I think that's...
And you can disregard the rest of the 50. So the 45, you can disregard them and
disregard them automatically because they are obviously not matching. So simple way would be match on company ID. I have this company ID. This matches to the notification we got through the webhook. Use that information and then get that specific information. That's a totally different approach in comparison to the way normally you do updates or data cleansing. Instead of sending or shipping the full database in every second week or every third week or every month. And that just becomes a hassle as well, because then you need to insert it into your database. You need to have tech people constantly working on that sort of data load is working then flawless. No corrupted data sets, etc. So new technologies is here to change or are here to change the way companies would interact with third-party data sources. I think that's one of the... It's very simple but very powerful way of working with
making
with
sure
data.
you have clean data over time. Super. That's a great takeaway. And speaking of takeaways, as we're coming up on time, what would you leave the listeners with? Do you have any final sort of tips and tricks to bring with them in terms of how to avoid bad data?
I think I will repeat myself now, but I think that get a process in place internally of how you should treat data, and I'm saying customer data, but that can be a general a process for how a company should treat data asset, and then use also we were talking about data scientists. We need to have, obviously, a data scientist, very good to have if he's spending time on the right thing. But then any company would obviously benefit from having data expertise. So even if you are using third-party vendors to ensure, which is one of the tips, let the third-party vendors ensure the data quality that comes from them. But you need to have a data expert, because customer data and if you want to have updates on that, you need to understand the data. If you want to use it in the right way, you need to understand what is NACE industry code, what does those revenue number means, what does a board member and the structure of a board, changes, ownership. It's complicated in the background. So if you have that kind of resource internally that can actually understand the data, you will obviously be much more efficient in how you're treating and handling your data. And I will just, and the final advice would probably be, do not send your customer record data away to those third-party vendors. It must be, a requirement, in my opinion, would be, can you distribute and create monitoring solutions so we do not have to push data and to make a copy of our database and send it to you. That's, for me, sounds like something you did in 2004 or 2001 and in 1994. But in 2022, obviously, use the modern technology, API and webhooks, to be able to integrate with any other third-party system and create your own sort of data policy and the way that you want to interact with the data. I think that would make life much easier for companies if they just started off having a data expert, using someone that can distribute the data in an efficient way, and trust the source, trust the vendor to be able to collect data from different sources, and then they distribute that to you. You shouldn't spend time on validating the information, but you need to understand the information and how you should use it. So stop sending files over FTPs. That's my final recommendation.
I think that's a good closing thought. Okay, so that's it. Thanks a lot, Pontus, for joining us, and it was
Thanks
great
for having me.
You've been listening to an episode of a Roaring podcast by Roaring.io. Feel free to share it with your friend, colleague, or peer if you liked it. If you wish to stay connected to us, don't forget to subscribe to the show. Thanks for tuning in. Until next time.